Alright, in this section we're learning about limitations to cell size. So in other words, why are cells so small and why are they microscopic essentially? The learning intention is still, can we explain cells as the structural feature of life? And you should pause here and read the success criteria to yourself. You should be able to explain the concept of surface area to volume ratio, which is a maths concept, and explain why there's a limit on how large cells can be. So, surface area to volume ratio. It's one of the most important concepts in biology, and it relates to so many different species and the behavior of species. And these are all some examples of where surface area to volume ratio is important. So, it's the reason why animals curl up when they need to stay warm, and why we curl up as well. It's the reason why leaves are so flat and thin compared to their volume, so they can catch as much light as possible. It's the reason why when you look at different species of penguins across from right down in Antarctica up to near the equator, you have larger animals in the colder areas, and when you get up to the warmer climates, the species of penguins are really a lot smaller because they have a higher surface area, so they can lose heat and they don't need to stay warm. And it's also the reason why these little desert foxes here have such big ears, so that they can get rid of lots of heat because their ears have a large surface area compared to their volume. So surface area to volume, it's a comparison between the surface area of an object and the volume of the same object. So let's demonstrate and show how to actually work out the surface area to volume ratio and understand what the concept means. So essentially, we need to work out the total surface area of an object, of a 3D object, and then work out its volume, and then compare those two as a ratio, and then simplify, so it's easier to compare the ratios among each other. So to do that, we've got 4 cubes here. We've got a 1 centimeter up to a 4 centimeter cube. So the first cube has a side length of 1 centimeter. To work out the surface area, as you should remember from maths, we will calculate the area of one of the faces, and then we multiply it by 6 because a cube has 6 identical faces. So the area of one face is 1 times 1, which is the area of a square. So that's 1 square centimeter. We always pronounce the units for area as square centimeters because they're literally a square unit. That wasn't a square. And then we have 6 faces, so we have 1 square centimeter times 6, which is 6 square centimeters, is the total surface area. For the second cube, one face is 4 square centimeters. Multiply it by 6, so we have 24 square centimeters is the total surface area. The third cube has a side length of 3. One face's area is 3 times 3, which is 9. And then we need to multiply by 6. 6 nines are 54 square centimeters. And the 4 length cube has 16 square centimeters as its face. So multiplying that by 6, we've got 96 square centimeters. Now we need to work out the volume for each of the cubes. And volume, remember, is just the length times the width times the depth. The length times the width times the depth. So for the first cube, it's 1 times 1 times 1, which is 1 cubic centimeter is the units. The next cube is 2 times 2 times 2, which is 8 cubic centimeters. 3 times 3 times 3, which is 27. And then 4 times 4 is 16, times 4, which is 48 which is 64. And now we compare the surface area to the volume and write it as a ratio, and then we simplify. So for the small cube, the surface area to volume is 6:1. The larger cube, 24:8, 54:27, and then 96:64. So it's hard to compare these ratios because we don't have a common second digit. So ideally, we should try and get all these ratios to be compared to 1. So the first cube is done. To simplify ratios, it's just like simplifying fractions, which we should remember. So we need to divide by common factors, and ideally the highest common factor of each number. The highest common factor here is 8, so we can divide each number by 8. 3:1. The 9 is a common factor here, so we can write it as 6:3. But that's not simplified completely, so now 3 is a common factor. So we can divide each number by 3 to get 2:1. Here you can always halve a number if they're both even, which is a nice start. So we have 48:32. 8 is a common factor here, so 6:4, 3:2, and let's halve them to get to 1 as the second digit, so 1.5:1. So now we can compare the surface area to volume ratio for all these different cubes. And it should be pretty obvious that the smaller cube here has the larger surface area compared to its volume. So we say it has a higher surface area to volume ratio. Surface area to volume ratio. And as the object gets bigger, its surface area compared to its volume gets smaller because there's more space inside it compared to the actual area of its faces. So what did we notice? Basically what I summarized. As objects increase in size, their volume enlarges faster than their surface area, which means, like I said, the surface area to volume ratio in small objects is greater than in larger objects. And here's another way of picturing it, which helps to just think of it logically. If we have one giant cube, which could represent one giant cell, it's got a total surface area here of 5,400 units. But if we chop that up into 27 smaller cubes, which are 27 smaller cells, it still has the same total volume, but it's got a much higher surface area. And now this is starting to show why cells are so small, because they've got lots of surface area. And let's think about why it's so important. Firstly, this little video at the top here is demonstrating a process called diffusion. And diffusion just means when a chemical that's dissolved in another, so in this case it's a yellow dye dissolved in the water, when it spreads out through the liquid from an area of high concentration, where it started at the top, and then it spreads out evenly to areas of lower concentration. And we'll learn more about diffusion later, but essentially it's how cells get their nutrients in and they get their waste out. Because cells rely on those processes for getting substances in and out really quickly. If we go back to one giant cell, it's got a low surface area compared to its volume. So for nutrients to diffuse into that cell, it's going to take a long time for them to diffuse all the way from the surface area to fill up that whole volume, because there just isn't a lot of surface area for the liquids, for the chemicals to get in. And the same for waste trying to get out. So if cells are too large, it's just not fast enough. Diffusion can't get those substances in and can't get the waste out. And that's what causes there to be a limit on how large cells can be. And as we found, the rough range for the larger cells is about 400 micrometers. And if we look back at the final diagram, if we have that giant cell, but then chop it up into 27 smaller cells, suddenly all these nutrients can squeeze between the gaps and they can diffuse a lot more easily into all those cells and a lot more quickly, which is the main point. And waste chemicals can easily diffuse out of the cells and be taken away out of the body where they need to go. So the higher surface area to volume ratio happens in smaller objects, and that's why cells are so small.